One of the concepts that we need to spend a few moments talking about is when we copy or duplicate smart objects, because there's some important implications there that can be a great advantage, but we have to think about the differences between a couple of different ways we can make multiple smart objects. So let's take a raw file. I'll just drag it from Mini Bridge in. So it takes me to Camera Raw. It's going to automatically means that it's going to be a smart object, so I'll just make whatever little changes I want, maybe a little bit of fill light in here. Okay. And it's going to prepare and place that in. So now at this point I can position it, do whatever I want. Let's rotate it a bit. And just for the heck of it, let's add a white stroke on it. So we're making it look kind of like a little photo. And let's add a drop shadow just because we can. Put it down there. Okay. So now at this point we have a smart object. First of all, I'm going to just twirl this down so I'm temporarily hiding the fact that we have the drop shadow and the stroke. It's still there. It just tidies up my layers panel. Now if I duplicate this, regular old Command or Control J like I duplicate a layer, here's what's going to happen. Now I have a copy of this, which I can treat independently initially in terms of things like this. I can make it a different size, put it down here. Now because these are duplicates, it's a copy done using that Command or Control J shortcut. If I change either one of them, double click to go back to Camera Raw, and let's just convert to a grayscale just because it's easy to see the difference. Click OK. When it updates the first one, it'll automatically update the second one because they're just clones of the same smart object. Let's undo that. Well, what if you want to have the same smart object but at the same time be able to edit them differently? So I'm going to delete that small one and make one minor change. Instead of just pressing Command or Control J or choosing Duplicate Layer, instead we're going to use this command, New Smart Object via Copy. And you can get that either from the Layer menu or by right or control clicking and choosing New Smart Object via Copy. Now at first glance it's going to seem like it's the same thing. I can still do the same kind of idea, scale it down, rotate it, do whatever I want. But the difference is now each one, if I double click, it will edit just that one. So if I double click on this one I created, it still goes back to Camera Raw. But now if I convert this to grayscale, you'll see what's going to happen is just this one will update. It's still the same, ultimately same smart object, but it's been made a copy instead of a clone, basically. So now it gives me the ability to have access to the same one, but edit them in a different kind of a way. And this opens up a bunch of different interesting possibilities. Let's look at a couple here. So we're just going to delete these layers. So let's use this file. This is a raw file that proved to have an interesting exposure challenge. So I'm going to drag this in, and it brings me to Camera Raw, where you can see my problem is if I try to expose for the barn, the sky's not going to look very good and vice versa. So I'm going to do it in two steps. First of all, I'm just going to worry about making the sky look good. So I'm going to change this vibrancy and saturation to make the sky look bluer and kind of the way I remembered it. So I click OK. It updates the smart object, and I decide on how big I want it to be. Let's just make it this big for the sake of argument. So now I have a smart object. Well, once again, if I do the same thing, New Smart Object via Copy, now it's going to duplicate. It's going to put it in exactly the same location right on top, but now it's not a clone anymore, it's a copy. So what does that mean? Well, it means if I double click on this one like we saw a moment ago, it takes me back to Camera Raw, but now, for example, I could put it back to normal and now just worry about making the barn look good. And as I increase the exposure of the barn, that red you're seeing is a clipping warning telling me that you're blowing out the whole sky, which is normally would not be a very good thing if this was the only exposure that I had. But at this point, I say that's the way I want this to look. Remember, these are both Camera Raw Smart Objects, so at any time I could keep editing those. But now I have two different exposures, one right on top of another. And now all I'd have to do is blend the two of them together. And there's various ways of doing that. The simplest way in this particular case, because the sky is so blown out, would be to try using these things called blend if sliders. So I double click on the top smart object. It brings up this layer style dialog box, but at the bottom these sliders called blend if. And if I take the one called this layer, this allows me to say take everything that's white and make it see-through. And as I push it and hold down Option or Alt to kind of separate this, you can see it's doing a pretty nice job of blending these together. But here's what makes it particularly nice, is even at this point where I've got two layers kind of interacting with each other. Remember, these are both started out as the same smart object initially and then made the smart object via copy, is I can still go back and say, yeah, I want my sky to be even bluer than that. So double click on this smart object, which is the one that's linked to my sky, change the temperature, change the saturation. Again, I'm going overboard so you can see the result. Let's put it up here. Click OK. It updates the smart object and in turn will update my layer document. So there's a very important difference between simply copying the layer, like duplicating like you can do with normal layers, and making a new smart object via copy. Which one should you use? Well, I answer that like I do many Photoshop questions. Well, that depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make an easy way to update a whole series of photos in one shot, then just make copies, just duplicate. But if you want to have this ability of creating two slightly different versions of the same Camera Raw file, or two different ways of editing, one separate than the other, then you want to go New Smart Object via Copy. Now, the next lesson we'll be looking at how we can take advantage of this very theory to do one of the coolest parts of smart objects, and that's creating what you could consider a template.